Bruce has raised a lot of points, so I'll just go through some of them. I think the most important thing is he's called for an analysis of direct effects. When existing crops are diverted to biofuels, there are no direct gains. And the reason is you're not producing additional crops. The flaw in the traditional life cycle analysis was to take a credit for something you're not entitled to. Take a credit for all the carbon that was going to be produced in those crops anyway. So that's the flaw, and the question you have to ask, the indirect is very closely related to the direct, because the question you have to ask is, by devoting a feedstock, a plant, to biofuels, are you getting additional carbon in the form of that feedstock, or are you simply taking carbon you've already got? So I've said this before, but that's the point. If you focus only on direct effects, there's no gain. And this gets into the question of kind of, one of Bruce's earlier comments, of blame the actual polluter. So if we divert a large portion of the world's food to fuel, then we want to blame the guy who goes out to produce more food. Why do we blame them? I think that's a good thing. But the real issue isn't the question of blame. The question is reality. What's going to actually happen? Are we going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or not? And if we have to clear more land to produce food, then we should do it. And it's going to happen anyway. And we can't claim a gain. Let me go into some of the issues of the life cycle analysis, because I think Bruce has actually teed up the issue really well with his example of electric cars. In fact, the overwhelming majority of the analyses of electric cars do exactly what Bruce is making fun of, which is if you switch to electric cars and you get your electricity from a combination of renewable and non-renewable sources such as coal, they do the calculation exactly counting the emissions from burning the coal, including the emissions from generating the coal. It turns out, by the way, that because electric cars are so intrinsically efficient in terms of their drivetrain efficiency, that even if you use coal to make your electricity, your emissions go down. But what if you have, let's say, a mix? You have 10% renewable fuels that, for our purposes, we'll assume have no emissions, and that's already there. That's in the mix, and 90% coal. And now it says, I'm going to have electric cars. I want you to give me credit for the 10% of renewable fuel that's already there. You say, I'm going to make a contract with the renewable fuel guys, so they'll just pass it through. If all you're doing is taking advantage of the renewable fuel that would be produced anyway, and that somebody else would use, the world is not better off just because by some paper transaction you claim the credit for the renewable fuel. The question is, when you add demand for electricity, how's it going to be replaced? And the way you analyze it is you look at the mix of things that are going to replace it. If some's renewable, if it's all renewable, then you get credit for that. If it's a mix of renewable and coal, then you take that. And that's exactly how it's actually done and how it should be done for reality purposes. Bruce has talked about the fact that we do have this big food challenge, and he's come up with a lot of examples of things that we do, ranging from eating too much beef to having golf courses that create competition for the world's land. And there is competition for the world's land. That doesn't mean that we can't have any golf courses, which is pretty trivial. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't worry about having some habitat in the United States as well. And of course, CRP lands are taking up and absorbing carbon as well, so it's not like they're not doing things as well. But we do have to think about all of these impacts on the world's land uses. And Bruce is absolutely right that it is critical that we try to reduce our demand for the world's land resources. We have to hold down our demand, our increased demand for beef and for other meat products. But the fact is that we're facing reality. We can't deal with a world the way we wish it were. If everybody in this room and everyone in the United States stopped eating hamburgers, how much land would we have available? And then just assume that that's the case so we can therefore add a bunch of biofuels. We have to deal with reality. The reality is that we have to produce a lot more food, including for beef and other things, whether we like it or not. And we don't have enough land to do that in reality today, even if we do a fabulous job of boosting yields. And I spent a lot of time focused on that issue, and so we already are going to have deforestation. That is what drives our deforestation today. Almost all the world's deforestation is because of conversion for agricultural use. There's degradation, but if you just chop down a forest for forestry purposes, it grows back. Maybe degraded, maybe not as much carbon, habitat impacts, but the actual deforestation is for agricultural expansion.